One of the things that's going to happen is we're going to have a more in-depth discussion of and instruction on ngundro, or preliminary teaching. And that's a really important, fundamental, and preliminary element of how one would enter onto the path and actually practice Dharma. In fact, generally speaking, when one actually enters onto the path and begins to practice Dharma, what we begin with are teachings associated with ngundro, or preliminary practice. Normally, what happens first is one receives teachings that cause one to turn the mind toward Dharma. My experience has been that for Westerners, that teaching needs to be deep, it needs to be extensive, it needs to be profound, it needs to be logical, meaningful, it needs to make sense, it needs not to rely on simply blind faith. There needs to be true understanding in order for the new student to actually take hold and actually hook in. That's been my experience. My experience has been that when a student somehow, through whatever circumstances, is introduced to Dharma at a more advanced level, and that sometimes happens. One will be introduced to Dharma by taking some empowerment or something that they have no understanding of what they're taking, and they finally found out now they have a practice commitment, and they have no idea what that means. You know, that sort of thing can be really terrifying and frightening for a new practitioner. And furthermore, since there is no understanding, it's almost like trying to make something okay on the surface that in fact on a deeper level is not yet okay, or is not yet suitable or acceptable. And so I'd like to spend some time talking about how one would actually begin to practice on the path, not necessarily the hows and wherefores, because that will be done in the next period of time, both by Khenpo, and then after he finishes, I will continue and continue to develop the new practitioners with that kind of understanding. But I would like to actually address some questions that newer practitioners over the years have expressed again and again and again. And these questions are interesting because they come with sort of loaded with preconceived ideas, and you can understand what the preconceived ideas are by hearing the questions. So let me begin by indicating to you what some of those ideas might be, or some of those questions might be. Here's something that newer practitioners say all the time. When they first get introduced to the idea of Dharma, they are normally attracted for whatever reason they are attracted. And it varies with each person. It's according to their habitual tendency, their karmic propensity, their connection, whatever that is, that will indicate how they enter onto the path. For some people, it's the attraction to what seems like something very exotic. For some people, it's the attraction to something that is a living, ongoing experience, spiritually speaking. That is to say, it isn't like the way perhaps many people in this country practice, let's say, Christianity, which is to go to church once a week or twice a year or whatever it happens to be. And then in between, not give so much thought to their religion. Many people who approach Buddhism are interested in something that really travels with you, that is more succinctly a part of your life, and more a developed philosophy that can be a true guidance in one's life. And for other people, they are simply connected to the teacher, that they see the teacher and they don't know what this is about, but they feel that connection and they go in that direction. For other people, they're looking for something, and this looks like a nice thing to check out. There are many different ways that people approach the path. But generally speaking, most people, when they approach anything new, including the path of Dharma, they don't really approach it with the idea of how hard they want to work. One of the things that's going to happen is we're going to have a more in-depth discussion of and instruction on Ngundro, or preliminary teaching. And that's a really important, fundamental, and preliminary element of how one would enter onto the path and actually practice Dharma. In fact, generally speaking, when one actually enters onto the path and begins to practice Dharma, what we begin with are teachings associated with Ngundro, or preliminary practice. Normally, what happens first is one receives teachings that cause one to turn the mind toward Dharma. My experience has been that for Westerners, that teaching needs to be deep, it needs to be extensive, it needs to be profound, it needs to be logical, meaningful, it needs to make sense, it needs not to rely on simply blind faith. There needs to be true understanding in order for the new student to actually take hold and actually hook in. That's been my experience. My experience has been that when a student somehow, through whatever circumstances, is introduced to Dharma at a more advanced level, and that sometimes happens. One will be introduced to Dharma by taking some empowerment or something that they have no understanding of what they're taking, and they finally found out now they have a practice commitment, and they have no idea what that means. You know, that sort of thing can be really terrifying and frightening for a new practitioner. And furthermore, since there is no understanding, it's almost like trying to make something okay on the surface that in fact on a deeper level is not yet okay, or is not yet suitable or acceptable. And so I'd like to spend some time talking about how one would actually begin to practice on the path, not necessarily the hows and wherefores, because that will be done in the next period of time, both by Khenpo, and then after he finishes, I will continue and continue to develop the new practitioners with that kind of understanding. But I would like to actually address some questions that newer practitioners over the years have expressed again and again and again. And these questions are interesting because they come with sort of loaded with preconceived ideas, and you can understand what the preconceived ideas are by hearing the questions. So let me begin by indicating to you what some of those ideas might be, or some of those questions might be. Here's something that newer practitioners say all the time. When they first get introduced to the idea of Dharma, they are normally attracted for whatever reason they are attracted. And it varies with each person. It's according to their habitual tendency, their karmic propensity, their connection, whatever that is, that will indicate how they enter onto the path. For some people, it's the attraction to what seems like something very exotic. For some people, it's the attraction to something that is a living, ongoing experience, spiritually speaking. That is to say, it isn't like the way perhaps many people in this country practice, let's say Christianity, which is to go to church once a week or twice a year or whatever it happens to be. And then in between, not give so much thought to their religion. Many people who approach Buddhism are interested in something that really travels with you, that is more succinctly a part of your life, and more a developed philosophy that can be a true guidance in one's life. And for other people, they are simply connected to the teacher, that they see the teacher and they don't know what this is about, but they feel that connection and they go in that direction. For other people, they're looking for something, and this looks like a nice thing to check out. There are many different ways that people approach the path. But generally speaking, most people, when they approach anything new, including the path of Dharma, they don't really approach it with the idea of how hard they want to work at it. You know, when you approach a new job, the idea of a new job, you don't approach a new job because you know it's just going to be a real backbreaker. I mean, you don't think, hey, I'm really looking forward to the grueling 9 to 5, that sort of thing. That isn't what attracts us. What attracts us is the payoff, the money, or the opportunity to do something exciting. There are things that attract us, but it's not the hard work. So after a person has been attracted to Dharma and they do discover that, in fact, there is hard work, you start to see a little bit of this. We do a little backpedaling, a little shuck and jive. Maybe, I don't know. I thought I was really going to jump into this, but maybe I should go a little slower. And so a lot of times students who are new will back off, and sometimes students who are old will back off. That'll happen too. But at any rate, when we approach Dharma, we have certain needs and ideas that must be fulfilled. One idea that people have that I think is really interesting, and I think it really bears answering, is that when we approach Dharma and we find out how hard it's going to be, one of the things we find out about is, let's say, ngundro, or preliminary practice. And in preliminary practice, there are 5 different things that one must accumulate 100,000 times each. And one of the first things that we have to accumulate is the scariest one of all. You know it's true. 100,000 prostrations. Anyone know what a prostration is? That's where you go up and down, up and down. 100,000 times you go up and down. And so when students hear that, although they still feel the attraction that brought them to Buddhism, they still feel some kind of connection. Something's going on here, they want it, but then when they hear what the price is, up and down, 100,000 times, and that doesn't count when your teacher walks in the room. You don't get to count those. You know, those are like extra. And you know, I mean, some of us, when we finally get around to finding Dharma, we're a little long in the tooth and a little stiff on the back, and you know, we think maybe 100,000 up and downs is good for somebody maybe half our age. But at our point, it's something to think about. And so here's the question. Here's what we ask ourselves, and it's a valid question. When you are doing prostrations, or maybe reciting a mantra, and that's another thing you have to do at least 100,000 times on several mantras, wouldn't it be just as good, rather than sitting there for, say, I don't know, half an hour? Half an hour? Half an hour is a short time to accumulate, but let's say, rather than sitting there for a half an hour, what if we said one really good Om Ahum Benzar Guru Pema Siddhi Hum? What if we said it so good that it's like the best mantra anyone's ever said? What if we said it so good that we are completely absorbed, rather than saying it 100,000 times per syllable, which is how you, well, anyway, you'll learn about that later. What if you said it once really good? First of all, you could pronounce it really perfectly, which nobody in America can do yet, but you know, you can pronounce it really perfectly, and then while you're pronouncing it, you can remain in complete absorption. Isn't that one of those kind of funny hand things that you see people doing in the New Age? We can do it in complete absorption. Let's say we can do it in such total absorption that even if lightning were to strike, we would be immovable, in immovable samadhi, reciting that one mantra. Wouldn't that be better than just saying, you know, wouldn't that be better than a half an hour of that, don't you think? That one mantra, that one glorious, earth-shaking, the earth moved beneath your feet mantra. So that's the question everybody has. That's the big question. Why do we have to say these things? And the underlying question is, why 100,000? You know, what fresh hell was concocted for us to make us have to recite this thing 100,000 times? You know, where is it written? Well, let me give you some information about that. The reason why we ask questions like that is because of our lack of understanding. We have an idea that if a thing is okay on the surface, it's okay. We have an idea that if, well, I like to use the analogy of one of my favorite analogies is poop soup. So let's talk about that a little bit. Poop soup. What's the recipe for poop soup? Well, poop soup is like, with poop soup, you do pretty much what sentient beings do as they move through time. You collect everything nasty there is through our own habitual tendency. And here's the part that we don't understand. Our life didn't begin 46 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 70 years ago, or however old we are. Our life didn't begin at that time, but in fact, the Buddha teaches us that we have existed as with having the idea of self-nature as being inherently real since time out of mind. And during that time, we have engaged in activity which was samsaric activity, mixed activity, meaning not understanding our nature, not understanding our qualities, not understanding the relationship between cause and effect. We simply engaged in activity instinctively and habitually with very little understanding. And so we have accumulated mixed habitual tendencies, extremely mixed habitual tendencies, including the habitual tendency of hatred, greed, and ignorance. So that's like cooking up a big pot of poop soup. Poop soup is basically all of the unclean things in samsara. You collect it all together in one pot, and you stir it up real good. It's yummy. It's a poop soup, so you can understand what the main ingredient is, can't you? Poop soup. Got it? Okay, so you stir it up. The fragrance of cooking fills your house. It's wonderful, right? And so the first day you cook up your poop soup, it looks like pretty much what it is, boiling poop soup, right? And the second day you boil it some more because that's how it is, life moves on. Poop soup is still boiling, and the second day it looks pretty much like poop soup. And the third day, things are happening. It begins to change. It's looking sort of colorful now. Fuzzy in places and colorful, and you know, it's changing. And every day that you look at it, one day it's kind of orangey, the next day it's kind of purpley. Depends. There's like different fuzzy little things that are growing on it. Poop soup changes every day. It's just a cornucopia of colorful delight, the fragrance of which continues to fill your house. And then one day, something magic happens. You go to check out your poop soup for the day, and you notice that on top of your poop soup, there is this wonderful, soft, furry layer of something pure and white. Sort of white, fuzzy something is grown on top of your poop soup. And here's how we think. We think now that our poop soup is all white and fuzzy and pure, it's okay. Now, the only reason why we think like that is because we don't understand that, in fact, we are not superficial creatures. We aren't that pure white stuff that's growing on the top. We are deep creatures, meaning to say we didn't just crawl out from under a rock. We didn't just appear in space. We didn't just start 35 years ago, 75 years ago, whatever it happens to be. But since time out of mind, we have been making connections, we have been engaging in cause and effect relationships, and we're like that pot of soup. There are many, many ingredients inside of us, and it's a deep pot. As we live, everything in that pot gets stirred up, from the bottom to the top, from the top to the bottom, from the side to the middle. It's always getting stirred up. But we think of ourselves in a very superficial way. And what that means is that on the day when we come up somehow magically just because of chance. It's almost like, it's almost like the slot machines in Las Vegas. One day you're going to get 3 cherries. Well, one day your pot's going to look like it's all white, and pure, and sweet, kind of like New York City when it snows. But you and I know that underneath there is a whole lot of trouble, right? That's true. But instead, how we think is that what's on top is okay. So we have this idea, and actually this is how we think, and it's an unfortunate thing because it does not lead to self-honesty. It does not lead us to a way to actually engage in practice and really benefit ourselves. We think, basically, because we think superficially, if you didn't see me do it, if I didn't get caught, I didn't do it. That's how we think. If you didn't see me, I didn't do it. If you didn't catch me, it didn't happen. What we're not taking into account is that we are deep creatures, that we have strong habitual tendencies that we have engaged in since time out of mind, that we are extraordinarily complicated, that there are layers and layers and layers and layers of tapestry or fabric or weaving that are part of our nature. To say one mantra, even if you say it so perfectly, so beautifully, pronounce it so well, and do so with complete absorption, could not possibly counteract time out of mind's worth of habitual tendencies and inappropriate, negative, or neurotic activity, which we have engaged in. So reciting one mantra meaningfully, or even reciting a series of them very meaningfully, could not possibly empty the depths, could not possibly purify the depths of that poop soup that we have created or that we have lived with for so long. So what we're up against here is we are using a technology that isn't meant for a person who's only lived one life. We're using a technology that really wasn't designed, was not given to the world to cure a superficial problem. It was not given to us to heal a scratch. The technology of Dharma is so extraordinary and so complicated, so deep, so effortful, because of what it is supposed to do. What it has to do is a big job. What it has to do is to purify non-virtuous habitual tendency that we have created and are deeply ingrained since time out of mind. Now, if you were able, we have another problem, and that problem is that it's kind of like we were born on a merry-go-round. You know what happens if you're born on a merry-go-round? You have no understanding that you're going round and round. The only way you could understand that you were born on a merry-go-round is if the merry-go-round would suddenly stop. But if that were natural for you, it would be invisible to you. And so for us, it's as though we were born on a merry-go-round. We have no way to know how much divisiveness, how much discursive thought, how much conceptualization, how much superstructuring goes on within our minds. We are literally, in many ways, strangers to our own minds. Actually, within our minds as ordinary sentient beings, there's a constant dialogue going on inside, constant inner dialogue. You have to ask yourself, between who and who? But it's going on, it's a constant inner dialogue. There is this white noise, this conversation that's going on, and you're answering yourself. That's the weird part about it. If you can really calm down and tune into yourself, you'll see that there's this constant inner chattering, inner noise, and it isn't even as simple as the one piece that you're able to hear and pick out. In fact, there's layer upon layer of it. It's like many, many tracks that we seem to be running on. So much discursiveness inside of us. And so what we are actually engaging in all the time in our ordinary lives is kind of a recital of, or an ongoing mantra of discursiveness. This chattering, this noise, this continuum that we experience of white noise within our heads, the one that argues, the one that answers, all that stuff that goes on inside. In fact, that is layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of delusion. Starting with the original belief in self-nature as being inherently real. And from that, all the superstructuring, including beginning with response, simply response, reaction. Because if one believes in self-nature as inherently real, everything else is other than self. If there is separation between self and other, there is going to be reaction toward other, or we cannot conceptualize any further beyond that, and you know we have. So we are involved in this process of discursiveness and ignorance constantly. We are right now, unless you are listening to me so carefully that there's no other room for thought anywhere else in your mind, and I don't think that's happening. Right now, we are reciting the mantra of suffering. You don't know that you're doing that. You don't have a mala in your hand. But we are right now reciting the mantra of suffering. We are reciting the mantra of samsara. Even within our minds right now, we are creating cause and effect relationships. Right now. Because it is impossible for you to be in this room with everyone else here, or listening to me, or doing anything in your life without having some kind of reaction to it. And that reaction continues and becomes deeper and more profound and more habitual, and there is kind of like structuring and ideation that continues to form from that. Continual elaboration. Every single thought that is born within our mind stream is more like, rather than a thought that continues in a straight line, is more like a pebble being dropped into a pond. It goes out in all directions. It continually elaborates, almost on its own volition. And so for the student who asks, why wouldn't one good mantra or one truly absorbed, devotional, purely conceived prostration be as good as 100,000 kind of dull ones? The reason why is because right now, and since time out of mind, we have constantly been reciting the mantra of delusion. And so we need a science or a technology that will antidote the depth of that process. You know how complicated we are. You know how that is. You know that we can sit here, open a Dharma book, read a prayer that's very profound, and really concentrate on it pretty well as we're reading it. Of course, if you really learn how to listen to yourself, then you know that even while you're doing that, there's something going, that monkey in your head is still doing something. But let's say we can really concentrate on it, and then we contemplate and we think, oh, what a beautiful thing this is. This is really something special, and we're moved and we are attracted to the Dharma, you know, that sort of thing. We know that we are so complicated that even while we are doing that, at the same time, although we choose not to listen to the voice that we don't like, that other voice is going, Dharma, what do we care about Dharma? We care about one thing. We care about watching TV and sitting on our fat butts. That's what we care about. Or, you know, we have all of our other conceptions and ideas about the ways we really want to live. And so while on the one hand we're, oh, these are the Buddhist teachings, and this is so pure, and this is so perfect, and I can see the virtue in that. You know, really you can. I mean, you all read the stuff, you can see the virtue in it. So you're thinking like that, and the other part of you is going, nah, nah, we don't want to do this. We want to be happy now. And so even while we're studying Dharma and practicing Dharma, this business is going on inside of us. So what we're looking for is we're looking for the kind of technology that can stir that pot from the depth. Stir it from the depth and provide the purifying agent or the antidotal agent, which is to put the weight in the opposite pile of what we ordinarily do. What we ordinarily do is have a divided mind and a lot of discursive thought, a lot of reaction, a lot of stuff that is associated with the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. So we're constantly continuing that practice. That's what we do. That's the Dharma, the worldly Dharma that we are practicing now. When we practice what the Buddha teaches then, when we practice what the Buddha has brought to the world, we must do so in a way that antidotes layer after layer after layer after layer. And it's almost like we have to seduce the monkey in our heads to chatter differently. Essentially, we have a lot of space to fill. So it takes at least 100,000. So it's kind of like that. But what we don't realize that makes this so difficult to understand is how complicated we are and how endless is our internal discussion and how much it controls our lives. Because it does. That monkey in our heads that we think is just a noise, that has nothing to do with anything, actually is in the driver's seat, is in control. Because if you're listening to that inner dialogue, it has nothing to do with your nature. It has nothing to do with the truth of you. It has to do with non-virtuous habitual tendencies. You know about the dialogue in your head. I don't have to tell you about this, but let me just remind you a little bit in case you're defending any of this. In case you're defending yourself against the onslaught of me telling you you have to do 100,000 of something. What's actually happening inside of your head? Everything imaginable. In fact, it's so busy inside of there, I don't know why. You know how, you ever heard that old joke where people will, I've seen comedians do that, they'll look at somebody next to them and say, is the noise in my head bothering you? I mean, really, I don't know how it doesn't, because there is so much going on inside most of our heads. It's like, it's pretty difficult. That's going on constantly. And inside of that, what's really happening? Well, think about it. Let's say you go to work, or you go to your family, or you're having some kind of particular experience that day, and it doesn't work out so well for you. In fact, let's say that someone said something to you that was unkind, and you didn't know how to defend yourself. You didn't know how to come back. You just sat there with it and couldn't defend yourself and just didn't know what to say. Well, what's going to happen to you for the rest of that day? You're going to have that experience again and again and again. And you're going to redo it so many different creative ways. And that's how you're going to spend your whole day. And that's only the noise in your head that you know about. What about the rest of it? But that's the kind of thing we're doing within our minds all the time. We're defending ourselves, defining ourselves, going over the separation between self and other, reevaluating that, planning for the future, how we are going to be on top, how we're going to be the star. All of our little neurotic propensities, although in our lives we've learned the skill of controlling them. After all, none of us have murdered anybody so far. We try not to do too much damage. We've controlled it to some degree, but in fact, all of that neuroses still continues within our mind stream. We suppress it, but it's still there. And so can you really honestly ask yourself whether there is wisdom in what the Buddha has taught? That in fact, when it comes time to practice Dharma, to realize the nature of one's mind, to see it purely and clearly, to wipe away the stain of non-virtuous behavior and discursive thought and ancient habitual tendency and simple ignorance. can we really ask ourselves whether there is wisdom in what the Buddha has taught when he said that this is something that needs to be worked at in depth, that there needs to be a great deal of effort in that direction? That in fact it really isn't that useful to have a wonderful, blissful, emotional experience saying that one glorious mantra that you thought would really do the trick. Because that's just another flower in the bouquet of human experiences and emotions. If you have a blissful, marvelous, emotional, contrived experience with that one mantra, it's really, in essence, not so very different from the blissful, emotional experience that you have when you do something else really well. Or when you buy a new car. Or when you get a new honey. Or when you taste a new kind of chocolate. Or whatever it happens to be. It becomes then simply another human, emotional experience that we contrive to look like or to be a certain way. Because that's what most of our experiences actually are. They are contrivances. In order to really stir the depths of samsara, that is to purify ancient habitual tendency, well-established habitual tendency, in order to create new habitual tendency, which is the habitual tendency of virtuous activity, a great deal of depth and effort has to come into that. So many recitations are required. And the goal here is not really to have an emotional experience. It is to recite the syllables associated with mantra, which are not ordinary, which have each and every syllable have a particular extraordinary blessing associated with the mind of enlightenment, and serve to actually purify the winds, channels, and fluids within one's psychic nature. So many repetitions here are the key. And then on top of that, since you thought maybe the way to do this would be to have a beautiful, deep, and profound experience anyway, you might try being completely absorbed in the mantra that you are reciting. Because you're right about one thing. This is a question that you've asked, and you're right about one thing. It is less potent to say mantra like this. That's less potent than to really remain absorbed in the visualization that is given to you by the teacher, and to remain absorbed in the activity itself. That is much more profound and much deeper. But still in all, even if you are to do it in a way where you're completely absorbed, where the experience is deep, where it's profound, where you're really paying attention, where you're really developing some clarity of mind, still in all, even with that, it is necessary to make many repetitions. And the reason why is because you are making many repetitions now. And there's a goal here. We are applying an antidote to something specific in order to have a specific result. There's a difference between reciting mantra for that reason, with that kind of perspective, then a difference between that and maybe coming to some teaching or going to church or coming to even a Buddhist temple or recite, hearing what I have to say to you, and then simply thinking, oh, now I've heard that, so therefore I've had some of Buddhist teachings. Okay, that's very good. There's a difference in the goal orientation, do you see? One of them is simply collecting something, having something, saying you've been there. A notch on the belt. It's something. And the other one is understanding the faults of cyclic existence, the conditions of samsara, the depth of it, the complication of it, and understanding that there is a goal, an extraordinary goal that cannot be reached any other way, other than to apply the necessary antidotes. That goal, of course, is enlightenment. That goal, of course, is what the Buddha experienced when he said, I am awake. It is awakening to our primordial nature, to our nature. It is a condition that is beyond form, beyond formless, beyond samsara, beyond even nirvana. It is an utterly conditionless and natural state. And to awaken to that nature, that is the goal. Now, while, according to the Buddha's teachings, that goal isn't very far away, it doesn't even have to be created. One doesn't create enlightenment, you see. Enlightenment cannot be created. The natural state cannot be brought closer or created or uncreated. It simply is not within the realm of that kind of activity. But what must happen is we must purify or apply the antidote to certain conditioned responses that we are chronically and continually engaging in order to develop a kind of spaciousness within our perception or our view, a kind of spaciousness within our mind, by which we can truly awaken to the primordial wisdom nature. So what has to be done is very deep. When you come here and you ask yourself, what has to be done here? It's not just hanging out being a Buddhist. I don't really care if you're a Buddhist. I just want you to be liberated. You can call yourself whatever you want. So to hang out here and be a Buddhist is probably equal to going to a movie. But to hang out here and really practice and really apply the antidote, now that's worth something. And that's the kind of frame of mind you have to be in and think yourself in when you actually approach the path. You can see, however, how confusing it must be. Sentient beings, we can't understand why it takes such an extraordinary effort. I mean, the other religions are much easier. So why wouldn't we want to practice that? And it's because, according to the Buddha's teaching, we are much more complicated than that. We are samsaric beings, and we have been for a very long time. We are filled with delusion. Our minds are just jammed with discursive thought of all kinds. We are constantly engaging in conceptual proliferation, superstructuring. We cannot relax in our nature and awaken to the primordial state. This is why it's so complicated to practice Dharma as we do. And this is why, these are the kinds of things that people ask. You know, why can't we get through this easier? And then they want to know, why do we have to do prostrations? Why prostrations? I mean, couldn't we just be devoted to standing up? Well, then you've got to ask yourself why you're asking that question. And you might say, well, it's because I don't like the getting up and down business. It's too hard, and it's too tiring, and it makes my back hurt, and I just don't want to do it. And so that's your answer. You get up and down every day, dance the jig, carry on, do all kinds of amazing, effortful activity in order to continue in samsara. I mean, how many calories do we burn every day? You know? What are we doing when we're burning those calories? Are we plowing forward towards Dharma? Are we moving through the door of liberation? No, we are going deeper and deeper into samsara. That is where our effort is involved every single day. And so when we ask ourselves, why does it take such an extraordinary effort? Then we have to go back and ask ourselves, do we understand what the goal is? What the point is? Do we understand why we're doing this and why we're here? And it isn't just to hang out. There's something that actually needs doing in order to attain liberation. Otherwise, liberation is not a fact, not a certainty, not a state, not a real goal. It's simply an idea, just like any other idea. Something floating around. It's just a word. It has no meaning. So instead, depth is required. Repetition is required. Contemplation is required. Thought is required. Attentiveness is required. Determination is required. Understanding is required. You must go into this path more deeply than perhaps you've ever done anything else. It doesn't mean you have to spend every single moment of every day in the beginning simply contemplating the Buddhist teachings. I'm not asking you to forget how to catch a cab. It's not what I'm saying. Or to forget how to cook dinner. But I am saying that we should be aware in the beginning that what we are trying to accomplish is possible, but only if we really understand what it is, what the goal is, and how extraordinary the goal is, and therefore how extraordinary the effort must be in order to achieve the goal. Because it must be that extraordinary. Or you're just doing something, another something, other than the other somethings that you're already doing. When we practice prostrations, we are, for one thing, we are applying the antidote to pride. Well, you think to yourself, shoot, if that's what we're doing, I'll just stop being proud. And how well do you think that's going to work? Because you know what you've already done? You've already said, I can figure out how to do this better than the Buddha did. You don't think there's a little pride in that? I do. There's pride in that already. So the Buddha teaches us that instead of being oriented towards entering more and more deeply into samsara, as we are now, and instead of being oriented towards engaging in non-virtuous activity and creating non-virtuous habitual tendency and continuing our delusion, instead we should make prostrations. And how do we make prostrations? We say, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the Sangha. The three precious jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and in the Sangha. Now, why is it necessary to do that 100,000 times and to bend our bodies when we do that? Because inside ourselves, we are constantly saying, I take refuge in what I want, what I'm going to get, and what I'll have in the future. I take refuge in, you love me, you take care of me, you give me stuff. We are constantly taking refuge in stereo, TV, CD player. We are taking refuge in chocolate. What else? What do you like? Cake? Ice cream? I mean, these are the ways that we think. I mean, we don't realize that, but when you go for something, what do you go for? You go for something else. You don't go for the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You go for ice cream. You go for a new car. You go for anything but the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And so now we're doing this practice where with our whole bodies, we're purifying body karma. The non-virtuous activity that we have engaged in since time out of mind, where instead of going for refuge, we went for ice cream. You know? So instead, now we are actually with our body, speech, and mind, using the body, by making prostration, using the speech by reciting, using the mind by remaining absorbed and visualizing. Now we are training in the same way that a bodybuilder trains a muscle, develops and trains that muscle by pumping it, working it, working it, working it. Now we are working to sharpen our focus, not to be simply reactive and discursive the way we are in samsara, going towards meaningless goals that with no distinction whatsoever. I mean, we'll follow anything, you know. Instead of going for meaningless goals that have no meaning whatsoever, instead now we are training body, speech, and mind to be single-pointed for the first time. This is pretty amazing when you think about it. For the first time, single-pointed, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the Sangha. And if you do it with your body, speech, and mind, the potency of reciting that 100,000 times is extraordinary. Simply extraordinary. I mean, completing 100,000 repetitions of the refuge mantra and prostrations is an extraordinarily life-changing experience. It's like stopping the merry-go-round for a minute. And it's almost as though if you were born on a merry-go-round and your movement was invisible, you know, and then suddenly you stopped, don't you think that something inside of you would go, whoa, 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 what's this? This is new. And that would be the beginning of a new kind of experience. And it's kind of like it takes the weight of that kind of practice to make that happen. And then the next thing that we have to accomplish is 100,000 repetitions of the Bodhisattva vow, a short version, bodhicitta mantra. So you think to yourself, well, if all I'm trying to do, well, what's the goal here? See, I'm trying to be compassionate. Okay, so from now on, I'm just going to be nice. Have you ever tried to make that decision? From now on, you're going to be nice? You ever tried to do that? How long did it last? Maybe 5 minutes if you're lucky. I think the all-time world record for a woman is 28 days. And that goes for her husband also. So it really can't be done. You can't just decide you're going to be compassionate. And why is that? Because you still have the weight of these ancient habitual tendencies and deluded perceptions. So the Buddha teaches us that what's needed here is to recite the bodhicitta mantra at least 100,000 times with the correct absorption, correct mental concentration, mental imaging, mental visualization, and under the appropriate, just as you are taught by the, don't make up your own religion now. Don't do that. Practice what the Buddha has taught you, just like the Buddha says, and that will change that. Rather than thinking, oh, okay, well, you know, let me see if I can rewrite this religion just to make it a little easier, which you guys have all tried to do, haven't you? Yes, we know that. So instead of rewriting the religion, we actually practice it the way that it was given. But we're thinking, wouldn't it be nice that, you know, instead of this 100,000 business, why don't we sort of do it the new way? This is a new age, isn't it? We'll just think positive all the time. Anybody ever tried to think positive all the time? That's another fun one. The world record for that is also 28 days. So, we have to understand that what's recommended here is not arbitrary. It's not, you know, some Buddhist person didn't show up a long time ago and say, see, when it gets to be about 1996, how are we going to torture these people? It wasn't like that at all. These practices are meant to antidote your particular situation. You must understand that these were not given to us by ordinary sentient beings. These were not authored by someone who felt that they had an answer. the way many of our New Age wisdoms are. You know, nowadays we hear people coming up with wisdom all the time, all kinds of wisdom. Came up with it 2 years ago, 5 years ago, had a dream, had a vision. Everybody's got some wisdom. But this stuff that comes from the Buddha is different. What actually occurred here is that the very mind of enlightenment appeared in the world as the perfected Buddha. This was not an ordinary sentient being. This is the Buddha nature appearing in the world in a form that we can see with our eyes. And from the mind of that nature, from the mind of that one, from that directly from the Buddha nature itself, this antidotal process was given. It's not the same as some mom and pop wisdom somebody cooked up nowadays. So it's not going to sound like, let's put a Band-Aid on an ulcer. It's not going to sound like, okay, well, you've been alive since time out of mind, creating lots of non-virtue. Just think positive, everything will be fine. It's not going to sound like that. It's going to sound like what it is. The necessary solution for what ails you. According to what you actually are, not according to your simple, simplistic, oversimplified, I should say, understanding of yourself. So the Buddha has given a very deep, very extensive, very profound method for a very deep, extensive, and profound problem. And there are no shortcuts. The other difficulty that new students have is they keep saying, well, this is amazing. I mean, this sounds like, you know, I've been looking for something that's that deep and that profound. And this sounds really good. And as soon as I have time, you know, I'll get into it. But right now, I have children, and I have a life, and I have a job, and a car to support, and all these things. So, you know, I'm rooting for you. And I hope, you know, I hope lots of people become Buddhist and do all this. But right now, for me, I have to wait. I have to wait for a while. I have to wait till my kids grow up. I have to wait till my car is paid for, right before I get the next one. And I have to wait for, I just have to wait, you know, because waiting is what I do. And so the thought that we have when we're waiting is that somehow this is all going to work out well. We'll be exposed to the Buddhist teachings and we'll hear something, and somehow, you know, it's that magical thinking. It'll just sort of come together eventually. Well, actually, if you really think about it, the Buddha's teachings are so extensive, so developed, so profound, so deep, that they take time to contemplate, to understand, to prepare for, to even build the foundation that causes you to practice foundational preliminary teachings. It takes time. Why? Because you have to change in the process. We're not in the business of applying Band-Aids here. It takes time for you to change. Some of you change faster than others. And it takes time to do the practice. The practice is extensive. So I'm looking around the room now and I'm saying that most of us are not under 10 years old. And therefore, whether we're 20, 25, 35, 45, 55, 75, and it takes time to do the practice. The practice is extensive. So I'm looking around the room now and I'm there's not much time for two reasons. First of all, as the Buddha taught, there is no guarantee as to how long any of us are going to live. And you can't understand this. This is like, for some reason, this is beyond human capacity to understand this kind of thing unless you yourself have been struck with a terrible illness or a terrible accident where you could have died or may still. Or unless you've seen someone near you just kick off. Once you've had that experience, you may understand, but before that, it's very hard to understand what the Buddha has taught. There is no guarantee that you're going to wake up tomorrow, or next week, or next year. The cause and effect relationships that constantly engage our own sea of karma, that sea of karma that is already hooked up and functional within our mind stream, is very fluid and is constantly being catalyzed by other events. Each one of you has most likely the karma to live for a very long time, and also the karma to die quickly. Which one will ripen? Well, that's up to you. It's according to how you practice, according to how you live, according to how you determine your mind state. Because everything you do, everything you think, everything you engage in is an additional cause and effect relationship and an additional catalyst. Everything you do is important. So for each and every one of us, the wisest thing to do is to begin to practice now. You know yourself very well. You know when you tighten up, you know what you need, you know when you get scared, you know when you do your best. You like to think you don't know, and you kind of get limp and act like you need guidance for everything. But in fact, you do know. You do know how to take care of yourself if you stop and think about it and engage in some self-honesty. So do whatever it takes to mother yourself through, to nurture yourself through, to get to the point where you can actually practice. I highly recommend for every one of you that when the opportunity to actually engage in Ngundro arises, and it will soon, Khenpo will give teachings on Ngundro, and then I will continue that process over the next year with small retreats where we can practice together. I strongly recommend that you engage in Ngundro. Although it's only a preliminary practice, it is extremely profound and extremely deep. And there are actually many highly realized lamas who only do Ngundro, or only do preliminary practice again and again and again. Really, preliminary practice, or Ngundro, has everything in it that you need. If that's all you ever did, if you did it in a very profound, deep, and devoted way, you could attain realization only through Ngundro. There's no reason why not. And that's true of most of the levels of Dharma practice. Each and every one of them has within it everything from the seed to the fruit. Each and every element of Dharma has a way to awaken. So I recommend for each and every one of you that you learn how to be your own best friend. That means don't wait, don't hang out, don't talk yourself out of it. Support yourself through whatever practice it takes for you to enter into the door of liberation and to be liberated specifically from suffering. And what you do, you should do not only for your own sake, because you yourself do not wish to suffer any longer, but you should also do for the sake of other sentient beings. Because once you have attained liberation, you can appear, and you will appear in the world again and again and again, in order to teach others, in order to bring others to the point of liberation, in order to benefit others. And the Buddha teaches us that there are so many sentient beings that really, literally, not all the great bodhisattvas and lamas have connections with all sentient beings. That's how many sentient beings there are. We don't have connections with all of them. And so that means that maybe there are sentient beings with whom you have connections. Sentient beings that you have been involved with in one form or another since time out of mind. And their only connection to future practice, to being liberated from samsara, to practicing Dharma, is you. Literally, there are sentient beings right now who are waiting for you to achieve liberation. The more you dance around with this, the more they suffer, and the longer they wait. From the moment that you begin to practice Dharma, these are the ones that you should live and breathe for. These precious ones who have hopes of you. You should think of them as your children, as your purpose, as your parents, as your beloveds. Because without you, they have not much hope. That's why we practice Dharma, that's why we work hard at it. To alleviate suffering for self and others. And we consider that to be completely non-dual and equally important. And so for this reason, it's time to face the music, go deeper, and that hated word, commit. But that's what it takes. So, oh my gosh, am I really going to end a class on the word commit? In America? Why are we scared of commit? We hate commit. We don't like commit. We'd rather be committed than have commit. Oh well, tough luck. Thank you very much for coming today. And that's it. That's the truth. What can I tell you?